Well, hello everyone, and welcome yet again to another Top 10 Movie Podcast. I am Jason Tripp. I am the moderator today, but I've got some collective wisdom alongside of me here. Got two friends, two fellow cinephiles with me again. I've got Adam Klein, who's feeling free today. He's got his Be Free shirt on there. Shout out to the Free Methodist Church in Canada. And all the way from Pennsylvania, Nick Furman, the Furminator, is with us again. Great to have you guys here today. Last time, for those who were watching, we were just joking, for the three people who have been watching our videos. Last time we were together, we did our top 10 movies of the most recent decade, 2010, 2019. We thought we'd turn back the clock a decade this time. And, one of the silver linings of this, global pandemic we're in is it affords us a little more time, screen time, although we make time for that all the time. But we've been whipping through some movies, rewatching dozens and dozens of films from this decade. I know you guys have probably watched quite a few more than I have, but we've whittled down our list. And so here's what we're going to do. We're going to, it was so hard to cram just 10. So we're going to cheat a little bit. And we're going to mention 5 honorable mentions, our 11 through 15, that didn't quite make the top 10. We're even going to go one step further, and we're going to include our 16 to 20 that just missed the cut, because it was a phenomenal decade for movies. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Adam Klein. He's going to kick it off with his 16 through 20 just missed the cut movies from 2010, 2019.
Yes. Okay. Awesome. My just missed these are the ones that really did hurt to cut. To not even get the official honorable mention, even though we're mentioning them now. But here are my I'll go 20 to 16 here in order. Number 20, Sweeney Todd, The Demon Barber of Fleet Street, 2007, Tim Burton. Another musical, The Lovely, 2004,
nice.
Ivan Reitman. WALL-E, 2008. My one Pixar shout out, their true masterpiece in my opinion. Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, 2004, which I suspect might show up later. And finally, the last one that I had to cut was Munich, 2005, Steven Spielberg's masterpiece. I think his best film, but there we go.
Awesome.
Okay.
So those are our like garbage. Let's get rid of these.
Yeah.
I know. It'd be funny.
Just tune back in 45 minutes. We'll get to the top 5. No, those are good. Those are solid.
Yeah.
All right. What do you got for us?
Okay, just missed the cut. So here's mine. Number 20, Lost in Translation. I think that's 2003. Number 19, The Departed, Martin Scorsese, 2006, I want to say. 18, Dark Knight, Christopher Nolan, 2009.
That pains me.
Yeah. 17, Little Miss Sunshine, 2006. I can't even remember the two that directed it. And 16, Garden State, which was Zach Braff.
I guess not nice. It didn't make the cut, but I like the shout out.
It's hard. It was hard. These jumped in and then jumped out. That's how I would say about them, most of them.
Nice. Yeah, a number of those I thought about putting in this list. It's just so hard. So my just missed the cut, 16 to 20. Number 20 is first of a couple foreign films on my list, City of God. Number 19, WALL-E as well. That's my one animated. I wanted to give a shout out to WALL-E. Number 18, Signs from 2002.
Nice.
I'm sure we'll hear about that a little bit later. Number 17, my favorite Steven Soderbergh film, 2000, Traffic. And number 16, just missing the cut, Memento.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
There we go.
All right. So we've taken out the trash. That's, all those 5 garbage films there. Now, these are the ones that made our honorable mention list that you may want to consider watching if you haven't. Of course, these are great films, but they didn't quite make it on our list. So, Adam, why don't you take us through your honorable mention list? This is your 11 through 15.
Okay. My 11 through 15. with as minimal commentary as I can muster. Trying to hold myself back a little bit here.
Right.
But number 15 for me of this decade, 2000, 2009, is Juno, number 15. Arguably Jason Reitman's probably best film. I don't know. He's made a few great films, but Juno from 2007, there really is nothing quite like it. The dialogue, the music, the story structure and visuals, just quirky, but in all the best way. Yeah. And I feel like I got to give attention to Jason Bateman's performance in this. I mean, he always plays a scumbag really good, but in here it's particularly thoughtful, and I love his performance in Juno. Moving up, so this is 14 is High Fidelity from 2000. High Fidelity is, for me personally, just one of the most wildly entertaining films ever. Incredible script, incredible performances. This was kind of Jack Black's breakout performance as a supporting character. John Cusack at the center of it all. If you didn't think depression and heartache could be funny, this is the film that proves you wrong. And I just adore it. So that's 15, 14, 13, trying to count backwards. Panic Room, 2002. My favorite filmmaker, I think, of all time, or at least tied for favorite film, I'll tell you, David Fincher. And Panic Room is not his best film, but it is, I think, the best thriller of this decade, 2000, 2009. It's just an incredible achievement, intense all the way through, incredible performances. Panic Room by David Fincher. And then moving up to 12, hold your hat, Furman, Requiem for a Dream.
Hey.
It got knocked out of my top 10. Furman knows my love for Aronofsky, and Requiem for a Dream. This was Aronofsky's first masterpiece from 2000. And it's not a film I can recommend to a lot of people because it's intense and painful to watch. But it is an artistic work of genius, I think. And And then finally, my number 11 honorable mention will be Quentin Tarantino's best film, Inglourious Bastards from 2009. This is my favorite Tarantino. I think it's his perfect achievement.
We'll come back to that one shortly.
And we'll come back to that one. But those are my honorable mentions.
Right on.
Solid.
Okay, my turn. So not my number 15 is Pan's Labyrinth, which is a 2006 film by Guillermo del Toro. I would call this good Guillermo. Lots of stuff going on in this one, but basically you got, is it the Spanish Civil War that's going on, guys, in that one? Yeah. So you've got this war film going on one level, and then on the other level, you've got a fantasy tale with the little girl who's kind of caught in the middle of this and how she's sort of escaping it. But I'm more interested in, to make this brief, because Jason told me he beat me if I didn't make it be brief.
Come back to that too.
To make it brief, I'm fascinated with Guillermo asking the question about monsters, and are monsters really evil and villainous, or are they just sort of misunderstood pariahs and such? And also, the film does a really good job of asking who the real monster is in the film. And he's not the guy covered in all the eyes. So, or whatever, the eyes and the hands. You know. So, like, right, exactly. This totally worth your time. It's in Spanish, but, get a life if you only watch English language films. And it juxtaposes fantasy, real world, war, and all this stuff. It's great. Number 14, Moulin Rouge. Oh my gosh, I can't believe I put this on here. But this is that was
number 52 on my list. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
Wasn't even on my radar.
Like, you're so high art, man. I can't even. This movie should not work. This should not work. Like, Baz Luhrmann I largely can't take him. But like that, all the costumes and the shaky cameras and the sort of weird line readings and weird humor. But in this film, it works. Like it works. You got John Leguizamo just killing it with this group of bohemians, and they're hilarious. The costumes work, and somehow they mash up all these contemporary songs, from U2 to Christina Aguilera, like all of it. But then all of a sudden, Ewan McGregor opens his mouth to sing, and you're like, oh my God, this is incredible. And the ending of that film still gets me. So I watched it again, expecting for it to drop, and it just didn't. Number 13 for me is Requiem, which is, I guess, was your 12, Kleiner.
Cool.
This was my introduction to good, like crazy camera technical work. It wasn't the French New Wave. It wasn't, I don't know. It wasn't Tarantino. Like it was this. And I borrowed off of Kleiner's shelf because he wanted to keep a Pandora's black box on his DVD shelf in college, I guess. But this is the first of a couple of films on my list that I think take things to logical ends. So like Kleiner, I would never recommend this as like a family viewing or like, don't do it. It's hard, but that's the point. Like this is what addiction does to people. And it ruins lives and changes people forever. It has one of the most indelible final shots in history, in my opinion. I'm not going to spoil it. And the work of the camera, you've got the handhelds and the mounted cams, and this sequence of editing he does for every time they shoot up and get high. It's insane. And then the other thing I'd say is that the film's arc mirrors addiction. So you got a rise and all the celebration, and then what happens when you're hooked, and now it's not want, it's need, and the downfall. Last thing, Up in the Air. Up in the Air is 12, and that is Reitman's other film, 2009. I think it's fantastic, and wow, Anna Kendrick is just great as this sort of naive, optimistic girl. It's one of my favorite late career George Clooney roles. But the real reason I put it on here is because it's about a group of people who travel around and fire people after the economic collapse. And that sounds kind of familiar with what's going on in the world right now. And lastly, Zodiac, which is a 2007 film by David Fincher. And Kleiner rightly pointed this out when we were talking about it. I think this is probably the most misunderstood film of the decade. People thought it was going to be a thriller a la Seven, I think. But it's not. It's a procedural. It's about writing. It's about newspapers. It's about police work. It's long, and it's kind of tedious deliberately. It's also a totally powerhouse Robert Downey Jr. performance, and the 2 or 3 actual villainous serial killer sequences are harrowing, like completely harrowing and incredible. So there you go.
Nice.
Yep.
I love how we discussed off camera. We're gonna like take 10 to 15 seconds.
I can't do it. I can't.
That's too much to ask, when you get these guys together.
I almost wanted to message Furman. Like quick honorable mentions.
I just can't. You need like a 10-second countdown timer, and then the mute button goes. No. It's all good. It's all good.
It's like cue the orchestra in the Oscars, right?
Yeah, exactly. Cue the music, right? Big hook comes on screen. Yeah, it's good. Love the passion, and that's just our honorable mention list. All right, let me breeze through my honorable mention list here. So I'm going to get this out of the way right now, Furman. Have no fear. This is not anywhere near number 1. My number 15 is The New World by Terrence Malick.
Oh, thank God.
You're not going to disown me or unfriend me after this.
Thank God.
It's not the best Malick, but it's in the upper echelon of Malick for me. I rewatched it recently, and it's still it just whisks me away. Like the cinematography, the world building, the attention to detail. It's just classic Malick, and I couldn't keep it out. It pained me to keep it out of my top 10, but I couldn't keep it on my honorable mention list. So that's from 2005, The New World, Terrence Malick. I'm a big Michael Mann fan, and 14 for me is Collateral from 2004.
Nice.
Just one of my favorite action movies of the decade. Just some great synergy, great back and forth dialogue between, a rare villainous role for Tom Cruise, coupled with Jamie Foxx. Just love what Michael Mann did, the cinematography, the score. It's a beautiful film. That's my number 14. My number 13, my wife's going to love me for putting this one on. This is one of her favorite of the decade, I'm sure, is Casino Royale. Everything that was wrong with previous James Bond films gets corrected, in my opinion, in 2006's Casino Royale. Daniel Craig's first, and we're coming up to his final swan song. I really hope he goes out with a bang, because he certainly came in with one. It's just everything I love about the James Bond franchise is encapsulated in Casino Royale. That's my number 13. My number 12, I got to give some love here to, before there was Birdman, before there was The Revenant, there was Amores Perros. Life's a bitch. And so, man, I rewatched it, and it didn't quite make my top 10. I thought it might, but it's been compared, I think rightfully so, to Pulp Fiction, the way that Alejandro González Iñárritu sort of weaves these stories together. Spoiler alert, if you're a dog lover, this one might be painful to watch for you if you haven't seen it. At the beginning of the movie, they even give a little disclaimer: no dogs were harmed in the making of this movie, which is hard to believe when you watch it. But it's just, I love movies like this and Pulp Fiction, others that just take stories that seem to be disconnected and they sort of weave them together in a beautiful, creative way. And Iñárritu does that beautifully in this film. So that's my number 12 from 2001. And staying with 2001, not quite in my top 10, is David Lynch's masterpiece, Mulholland Drive, which I rewatched again. And man, David Lynch, I would love to spend a weekend with David Lynch, like just talking with him, because he is one creative director, and this is rightfully his masterpiece. I could go on for a long time, but this is honorable mention territory. So if you haven't seen Mulholland Drive, watch it. You'll give your head a shake when you're done. What did I just watch? But it's classic David Lynch, and the story he weaves together is phenomenal. So those are my honorable mentions.
What would it be like to put David Lynch and Terrence Malick together in a room, and what would Jason do to get in that room?
Okay, let's go back to the beginning.
Life in those times was hard. Hard enough to crack a coconut. For argument's sake, let's say I was a horse. Even so, it'd be hard to imagine how hard my first wife rode my ass. I'm a small man, and not necessarily of what you could call good health, but I took it from her for 6 long years.
Was that anywhere near your top 20, or no? Or you're not big on Lynch?
Well, you're going to see that one again for me.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. I'm glad I held my tongue. We'll talk a little more when we get there. Cool.
Yeah.
Okay. So, we've taken out the trash. We've talked about the ones on the fringe. Now, we're kind of getting serious now. Top 10. So these are ones you may want to consider watching if you haven't already. So let's go one by one, starting with number 10. Adam Kleiner, what do you got for us?
All right, my top 10 of the 2000-2009 decade. My top 10 has to include the greatest superhero of all time by one of our greatest living directors, creating the best adaptation of this superhero story, and therefore The Dark Knight from 2008 is my number 10. And I don't know if Furman, you have any memories from college from this, but I just remember the first year and a half of my college experience was just hunting the internet for any information about the filming and the production of this film that my newly discovered favorite filmmaker, Christopher Nolan, had now been responsible for Batman, and was pulling a largely British cast together and then of course fell in love with his first venture into this with Batman Begins, and then to hear the mystifying information that in the sequel he had cast Heath Ledger for the Joker, which was the person furthest from my mind to think could encapsulate this incredible character, and yet so much of this comes together with incredible precision and perfection in terms of telling a harrowing tale of superhero and sacrifice. I think actually the thing I think of most when I first think of The Dark Knight, I think of a film that never lets up. That's actually I should have said that first. That's the thing that I will forever remember the first couple of times watching the theaters, and then upon rewatching, is between Hans Zimmer's score and Christopher Nolan's craft and care of this story. This is I don't know how long it is, 2.5, whatever it is. The film is just constant climax, constant ratcheting up the tension, and never letting up, to the point that was probably one of the most thoughtful conversations I had upon seeing that film originally, was a friend saying that, like, no one should go through that kind of experience. That shouldn't be allowed. Right. It really was an illuminating thing about the medium of film, right? In a novel, when things get really intense, you can set it down and give your mind and your emotions a break. In a film, you can hit pause or leave the theater, but the expectation is that you're stuck there for the duration the director has decided. And in the case of The Dark Knight, it's just reeling. It's just ratcheting, flipping our expectations in terms of what is a hero, and what is sacrifice, and what is chaos and madness and anarchy. And anyways, I adore Batman. Has always been my favorite superhero for a lot of different reasons, and this The Dark Knight was the perfection of that story in my mind.
Nice. I was supposed to jump in and say that's on my list higher. Oops. But you were in the zone there, so I didn't want to interrupt. So
we'll come back to it then.
All right. Glad to hear it. Made your top 10. Berman, what do you got for us? Number 10.
Well, I'm going to pull you in for this one because my number 10 is Mulholland Drive. So, and honestly, it wouldn't have been before the rewatches, before I went back. I like Lynch. You probably like him more, but I do like Lynch, and he's an interesting guy because he sort of does this, what is it, like transcendental meditation or something, and then I read that Blue Velvet was basically, he had a dream about a thumb in a field and a cabaret singer and something else, and then he makes Blue Velvet, But what was I going to say about Mulholland Drive? So one thing I would say, if you're gonna watch this, have you guys seen the 10 Clues?
Take some hard drugs before you do? Is that what you're going to say? No.
Yeah, right. That's the one. That's right. Well, so the movie is some of Lynch, what I was going to say, some of Lynch is borderline unwatchable. Like, I don't know if you guys have seen Eraserhead, but that's kind of like going to the dentist and not getting noted for a root canal. But this one is very watchable. And in fact, my number one thing about it is I think it's one of Naomi Watts in this movie is unreal, because she's essentially playing two people. Sorry, that was a mini spoiler, but not really. Yeah. And they're very, very different, and yet she nails them like completely. But one thing that changed for me, have you guys seen the 10 Clues that Lynch released about the movie? It was on my DVD liner. Like, shockingly, I opened it. I was like, it's also all over the internet with a bunch of trolls who want to claim what every clue is, because Lynch is like famously tight-lipped. He'll be like, right, figure out what it's about. Like, I don't care. And like the hag behind the dumpster at the diner, like, figure it out. But in this one, it does help. But I think if you watch it, there are themes that present themselves and things that kind of come out of it. And you sort of get the 3-act thing, particularly the third act being very distinct from the first two. So I don't know. What do you think about it, Jason? Like,
it's one of those movies that it evokes emotions, but it's hard to put into words. I'm not saying that as a cop-out, but I watch it multiple times, and each time it stirs something different. And I try and put my finger on why or what. and it's hard. It's like nailing Jello to the wall. But I know that it captivates me and it draws me in, and that's like Lynch. I mean, in a sense, Malick does that to me as well. But in this film, like Naomi Watts, her performance is, I don't know if she's ever had a better performance. I mean, she's done a lot. Oh, here comes the answer now. Phone. Note to self, before you record a podcast, turn off the home phone. Yeah, this is, I watched it this time, and I felt like I wanted to go to those top 10 spoilers, and I'm reading on the internet far and wide. I'm reading like 50 different reviews, and they have 50 different ways to describe the movie. And I'm like, good, because I don't need to definitively understand every little bit of it to enjoy it. It simply evokes some emotions for me. Wonderful performances. Lynch has a vision for it, and I like a guy like Lynch because some of his movies are crap, like Eraserhead, but he doesn't care, right? He's got a vision, he just goes for it. I'm like, good on him. I'm not going to like everything he produces, but this is one of his masterpieces, and along with Lost Highway, in my opinion. So if you haven't seen it, I would watch it. You might not like it. It's not for everyone, like most things on my list. But Lynch is unique. You got to give him that.
Yeah, I mean, it's there are some red herrings in the clues, but some of the clues definitely do point to some things, and there are themes that you can. It's not indecipherable. There are parts that are kind of obtuse, but it's not indecipherable. So that's my number 10, Mulholland Drive.
Nice. My turn. Mi numero 10 son las 2006 películas Labyrinth del Fauno del aclamado director mexicano Guillermo del Toro. Pan's Labyrinth es una de las mejores películas de fantasía jamás creadas. Del Toro construye a la perfección dos mundos increíbles de tener una narrativa de la guerra civil española e transada e da historia con un mundo caprichoso y iterando de cuentos de hadas con personajes como nada más que haya visto ambos vistos y experimentados a través de los ojos de Ofelia, el protagonista de 11 años de la película. Igual que todos de película en mi lista de los 10 primeros, considero que Pan Labyrinth de Del Toro es una obra maestra que con razón merece ese lugar en mi lista de los 10 primeros de la década. My number 10, Pan's Labyrinth.
See.
My apologies to all you native Spanish speakers. We will include subtitles.
Please don't cancel us. We're laughing at Jason's interpretation of their Espanol, not the actual language.
That's your number 10, Trip?
That's my number 10.
It's my number 9. And between the pontification that you just shared with us and what Furman was supposed to share in 5 seconds, it's kind of covered. Like, I actually really, really loved what Furman said about it, and the way you shaped it and described the story and who's the monster, what's the monster, and all that kind of stuff. Here's the thing, like for me, like I'm a fan of Guillermo del Toro. I'm a huge fan of him as a storyteller. But he's one of those filmmakers that I love who actually only has a handful of films that I think are incredible works. I would say more than half of what he's done, in my experience, has in some way sort of been half-baked or just missed the mark or too on the nose or whatever it is. But there's a few of them that he's done, and this is the pinnacle of it, Pan's Labyrinth, where he has, literally shown me another world, but he has shown me another way of experiencing a type of story that actually is a pretty far reach for me. I'm not a big fantasy guy. You won't see Peter Jackson on my list today. I know he'll probably make an appearance for you guys. You guys adore it. And I don't get me wrong, I have appreciation for it and enjoyment for it. But this was one. But that's what I think of. I think of Pan's Labyrinth and what Del Toro did with this story, with his characters, with the little girl, seeing it all through the eyes and the imagination of a child, seeing tremendous suffering and violence all around her, and allowing us to experience true human depravity and whatever, just true brokenness, human brokenness, through the eyes and the experience of a child, and even thinking about the traumatic experience of storytelling and what that does for not just a child, but anyone in the midst of all of that. But I mean, Pan's Labyrinth is just this beautiful cacophony of all of Del Toro's influences. One of the reasons I do love Del Toro is because he is one of the world's most renowned Hitchcock experts and collectors of paraphernalia. And and you can just see the influence of his work and others and all of his works. But it's a fantasy, and it's real world, and it's painful in both, and yet beautifully and mysteriously hopeful in the midst of all of that. And and I adore Pan's Labyrinth. That's why it's my number 10. It's why it's Tripp's it's my number 9, Tripp's number 10, and why Furman had it in the honorable.
Why Furman ruined it by running his mouth.
You pretty much translated my Spanish verbatim there. That's pretty much everything I summed up now. No, it's pretty amazing though, to take like a real world and a fictional world, and this wouldn't work for a lot of directors, but Del Toro sort of weaves these two worlds together, the real world trauma of the civil Spanish War, and then the real world sort of trauma as she's exploring this labyrinth and encountering all these creatures. And the creatures, my goodness, like I've never seen creatures like that in any
production value is incredible.
I mean, this pale man in particular is just gruesome, right? My kids wanted to watch this. I'm like, no, this is a little too intense for them still. But Del Toro, just quickly, I know we got to move on, but he went on record in 2017 saying the pale man represents all institutional evil, feeding on the helpless, just as he's feeding on that sort of banquet feast on the dinner table there. And he says it's not accidental that he is A, pale, and B, a man. He's thriving now, he says in 2017. These are pale man times. And I think that rings true now, 3 years later in 2020. So there's a lot of real world parallels today in Pan's Labyrinth, which just elevates it even higher in my book. So, yeah. Cool.
Awesome.
All right, Furman, number 9. What do you got for us?
Well, okay. This was a moment of truth for me, this film, because I had to really wrestle with best versus favorites of this director. My number 9 is Kill Bill Volume 1 by Quentin Tarantino.
Oh.
So, yeah.
2 against 1, you lose.
What's that? 2 against, yeah. Well, and I went back and I watched all 3. Yeah. I mean, I didn't watch the Grindhouse stuff, but I skipped that, you know. But Inglourious Bastards it's definitely a better film. I agree with what you said now. It's especially on rewatch. I was just blown away by some of the talking and the dialogue, the acting, a couple key sequences, all that stuff. But Kill Bill was my introduction to Tarantino. It wasn't Pulp Fiction. It wasn't Reservoir Dogs. It was 2003 or 4 at the theater in, I think, Buffalo, Kleiner.
It was college. It was our first,
Yeah, and I went in and I saw it, and I was just like, holy crap, like this is unreal. Like we got the score. Look, Quentin's scores are always awesome. His soundtracks, scores, whatever. But this is like way up there. It's insanely good. And he's shooting a kung fu film, throws an anime sequence in the middle of it. And then in the end has this insanely huge fight over like basically the Love Shack, but Asian version, like singing, you know, and Uma Thurman is incredible in it with the wiggle your big toe stuff. and it's just, it was my introduction to Quentin's like title cards and to his just like, I don't give an F about time stuff. Like she crosses out the name of the second person and you see the first person already crossed out who she kills way later in the film, and all this sort of stuff. So I think Quentin, he did better things for sure, but this is him at his most fun in some ways.
Right.
And it's still great. It's still stylistic. Like in the fight with the crazy 88s, there's like sequences of things flying around. There's a site where they drop all the lights and then they're fighting against like silhouettes, and he's doing it, man. And it definitely pulled me in. The other stuff came later, and so I think I would not be being true to myself. The only other thing I want to say before I get long is that he's a total homage maker. Like he pays homage to all kinds of other people. And this is a film. Yeah, buddy. Yeah. And that's two, right? Like the fact that he can make a first film, which is entirely plays out in these old kung fu films and just gritty Asian crime, like this things he's obsessed with, and then makes a second film which is much longer and just like very, very Western trope-ish. It's unreal. He's one of the only guys probably the only guy that could do that. So yeah, that's my number 9. Awesome. Volume 1.
That's well said, and that's a great film. You know, I love most of Tarantino's stuff, but there was only room for one in my top 10, and I went with Inglourious Basterds, but not quite yet. That'll be a little higher. Okay, my number 9. Apparently, I'm a bit more of a fantasy film lover than Kleiner is, because I got my 2 fantasy back to back here. Pan's Labyrinth is 10, and I wrestled with which one to put higher. But here's my thing. When I look at the Lord of the Rings, I look at it as one film. I cannot sort of look at this as 3 separate films. They're meant to be watched and progressing. So if I had to pick one, if you push me into a corner, I think we had this conversation earlier online. I think The Fellowship of the Rings is my favorite by a nose over The Return of the King. But they fit together hand in glove. And I just watched with my kids the extended cut, all 3 of them, over 3 days, and it was glorious. It was amazing. What Peter Jackson has accomplished with this is nothing short of breathtaking. I mean, and I remember when I first heard that I've been a Tolkien fan since I was a kid. So this goes way back before the big screen. But I remember when I first heard that Peter Jackson was going to take on this project, I cringed. I was like, oh, there's no way it will come anywhere close to the glory and the beauty of Tolkien's original masterpiece in writing. And then I saw Fellowship of the Rings. I'm like, wow, this is much better than I was anticipating, and that continued throughout all 3 of them. And so it's one I'll rewatch every few years. I'll pull it out. My kids love it as well. I mean, watching it with my family makes it that much more enjoyable. I mean, what else could be said? I mean, I'm sure everybody watching this has watched it. If you haven't, what are you waiting for? Get down to your basement tonight and watch Fellowship of the Rings, followed by the other 2. Just the spiritual symbolism throughout is meaningful to me as well. Just the theme of the lust for power and what power can do and how it corrupts. And just the Fellowship of the Rings in particular, these unlikely people that are coming together. They're so diverse, they're so different. There's bickering and fighting, but when they focus on the mission that is before them and the rescuing of all humanity in Middle Earth, that sort of binds them together. And that speaks a lot to me, sort of as a pastor in the church community. That speaks volumes as well. So there's a lot of philosophical and spiritual content, but just from a cinematic perspective, it's breathtaking. The cinematography, the world building, the characters, it all fits for me. It checks off all the boxes of what I want to see in a fantasy film. And so it's a 3 for 1. But Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Rings is my favorite by a nose over the other 2. That's my number 9.
And nice. That's actually in my top 5.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's all good, man.
Supposed to cut me off here, yeah.
No, I don't have to cut. No, you nailed it. The only thing I would add is the Jackson thing is interesting to me too, because I would go on record as saying I don't like most of his films, or I don't at least love them. But it's like somehow this worked like really well, better than say, I don't know, King Kong, Heavenly Creature. Like there's a couple other things we could talk about. Not that we need to relitigate Peter Jackson's overall, but it totally works. And I surveyed like 10 random people, not random, very specific actually, you two, and about their favorite Rings film.
Okay.
And like I had them put them in order, greatest to least great. And I got like a ton of different anss. And I think
all the possible permutations are there, right?
Right, every iteration, man. So like I think that just points to how good they all are, right? I mean, we're not dealing with like polished turds here. These are great films, and I think honestly, I think the answer is The Lord of the Rings, like you said, Jason. But my pick is also Fellowship. It's my number 5 because I think that it was too big of a cultural event not to have it that high for me personally.
Yeah.
And you know, the middle film, the two. Anyway, you could weigh the different things. Like some people say The Return of the King has like 16 endings, and the middle film syndrome of Two Towers, and it only has this huge battle, but the huge battle is Helm's Deep, pretty good battle. And then the first one is kind of the introduction to it. They're all great, but I'm with you, man. I just went with the nose, the first one by a nose, just because of the valor and the bravery and some of the final scenes in that one really kind of stuck with me.
Well, and I should say, even though he doesn't make an appearance on my list, I mean, you mentioned the cultural event. I mean, deep memories of when that Fellowship was released, and the experience and the anticipation, and yeah, just all of those things. Even when I was in high school and I worked at the movie theater, greatest job ever, by the way. The competition on staff of how many people could go see it, how many times, and this kind of stuff, and incredible work. But a sidebar, at some point, actually, because you reminded me of this, we should have our own conversation about King Kong, because I actually am a huge fan of Peter Jackson's King Kong, but we'll leave that for now.
That's good.
But well, yeah, I'll keep us going. Number 8, right?
Yep.
And number 8. So, and I'll just make the connection quickly, because my number 9 was Pan's Labyrinth, and we all had that. That was our first overlap. And the connection for me for this one, for my number 8, is the production, because my number 8 is 2003, one of Martin Scorsese's greatest films, Gangs of New York. Probably one of Martin Scorsese's most underrated films, or underappreciated films, Gangs of New York. And not unlike what we were just saying about Fellowship, I have vivid memories of just being swept away by the production and the epicness of this story of Gangs of New York. The incredible lengths that they went to create just the physical history of New York City, and the gangs and the characters, and the sheer complexity of trying to make that kind of world real and coherent in terms of narrative and where it comes and where it goes. And of course, this was also the first time Scorsese worked with DiCaprio, and that started a long relationship. I might even argue that this was the best pairing of the two of them, actually, or maybe just characters that DiCaprio has played for him. But Gangs of New York is an epic tale of history, of learning from the many atrocities of human history, learning from that, and recognizing the sins of our fathers, recognizing the blood that was shed for the foundations of our society. But again, on top of all of those themes and philosophical content, just a truly epic story and epic production that just every time I rewatch it just sweeps me away and brings me back memories of one of the first times I really felt fully immersed in a deeply complex world. Yeah, Gangs of New York is an incredible achievement, and should probably be given more praise than it typically gets. But that's my number 8.
Yeah, it's about Bill the Butcher.
That's true. I didn't even mention Bill the Butcher. I appreciate. I mean, I know Daniel Day-Lewis is going to come up again later in some of other people's lists. But yeah, for me, this is actually Bill the Butcher in Gangs of New York is actually, in my opinion, Daniel Day-Lewis's arguably his greatest performance. Yeah, that's fine. But
It's great.
yeah, there is incredible. I'll say this just upon rewatch. If this movie matters to you, in memory, you might only recall the theatrics of his performance in Gangs of New York, the theatrics of Bill the Butcher. But upon rewatch, there's incredible nuance. There's incredible moments in the story where you certainly don't sympathize with the character and his villainous ways, but you understand them, especially given the historical context. And that, again, and that's due, I mean, yes, to the writing, but Daniel Day-Lewis is ultimately responsible for the embodiment of this performance and what it does for the story. So,
how old are you, Amsterdam?
Not too sure. Never did figure it.
I'm 47. 47 years old. You know how I stayed alive this long? All these years? Fear. The spectacle of fearsome acts. Somebody steals from me, I cut off his hands. He offends me, I cut out his tongue. He rises against me, I cut off his head, stick it on a pike. Raise it high up so all on the streets can see. That's what preserves the order of things. Fear.
Good. Awesome. All right, Furman. Number 8.
My number 8 is the other foreign picture on my list, and that's the South Korean film Oldboy, which was remade in the U.S., and I would encourage people not to watch it. My like for Josh Brolin aside, it pales vastly.
Brolin will redeem himself shortly, though, right?
Yes, he will. Brolin's coming back around. So this is the other film I was referencing when I said in Requiem, the idea of taking things to their logical end. Is it Chan Park? Help me with the director's name, Trip. Park Chan-wook is something like. Yeah.
Chan-wook Park.
So he made what they call the Vengeance Trilogy, and this is in the middle of it. This, to me, is the personification, the quintessence of the concept of vengeance. It's really violent. It's hard to watch. It's got this sort of dark, sort of Asian urban palette to it. There's fighting in it that does sort of mirror martial arts film, Asian martial, like John Woo stuff, like Hard Boiled and things like that. But it's disturbing. The ending especially is quite disturbing, but I appreciate it because of its rumination on vengeance. Like, we think of vengeance as something that's often amusing, like Tarantino makes it kind of amusing, and I know what he's doing there. But in this case, like, it truly will wreck you if you think about unforgiveness from sort of spiritual perspective. I've heard unforgiveness described as like drinking poison and hoping the other person gets sick. That's what you've got in this film, and it's two men who are out to really destroy each other. And if that's not your cup of tea, then I would never press play. But if you like these sorts of films, and to final thought, it's got one of the best opening shots ever in a film. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, Trip. And
this was my 21. This is my 21. And a decade ago, it would have been in my top 10 easily. Like, I lived in South Korea. I love Korean film, but yeah, I mean, I can't get into the gravity of a movie like that like I once could. I still respect it. I'll probably rewatch it at some point, but yeah.
So bookending, incredible open shot and incredible reveal at the end, which is devastating. But again, to me, it's supposed to be like, if you're gonna, like, Guy Ritchie likes to make vengeance films, we're just kind of chuckling around as people are getting killed and stuff. But in this one, the stakes are real, and that's what I appreciate about it.
Absolutely, solid choice for sure. Okay, my number 8. I'll be brief. I know we got to keep moving here. has already been mentioned by Kleiner, and it's The Dark Knight.
Nice.
And much like Lord of the Rings, I was cautiously optimistic when I heard Nolan was taking us on. I had seen some of his earlier work. I'd seen Memento and enjoyed it. Batman for me too has always been my favorite superhero because he's just a guy. He doesn't have lasers coming out of his eyes. He doesn't have all these MCU superpowers. And I was, I liked the old Tim Burton, the first one at least, with Michael Keaton and Jack Nicholson. I enjoyed that. But I remember seeing Batman Begins for the first time, and I was like, wow, this is intense. I'm enjoying this. I mean, how are you going to top this with the next one? And then all of a sudden, The Dark Knight comes out. And it's like, oh my goodness, he just topped Batman Begins. Now the third one tapered off significantly. It's still decent, but this is the epitome of a superhero movie for me. It is my favorite superhero movie. That's comparing it to anything in the MCU universe. I mean, I like those as much as the next guy, but this is on another level for me. Heath Ledger, can't say much more about his performance. I think it's still tops Joaquin Phoenix last year. They're different performances. They're both phenomenal. But Christopher Nolan, the world he builds here is incredible. And it's my number 8. It's my favorite superhero movie of all time, and I can't see that changing anytime soon.
So I guess if we're including the 5 knockoffs, that's technically our second triple overlap, right?
Yeah.
I suppose. But
yeah, that's right. Yeah, I was on your list too, eh? Yeah.
All right. For my number 7, and actually I'm going to talk about my number 7 and number 6 because in my mind they're very closely connected. But my number 7 is arguably one of the greatest crime films of all time from one. Well, I mentioned Fincher already. So the guy who's tied for my favorite filmmaker of all time, Sidney Lumet, and his very last film, Before the Devil Knows You're Dead, from 2007.
Nice.
And yes, Before the Devil Knows You're Dead, a lot of people actually haven't seen it, didn't get a huge release, didn't get a lot of attention, a hidden gem. Certainly in terms of content, a warning, it's very graphic and very dark. But honestly, Lumet, who else would achieve one of the greatest crime stories of all time? It would have to be him. And sadly, it was his last film, but what a film to end a career on. And but the story itself is a story of desperation, and the way it's cut, the way it's shot, it's melodramatic. That's the thing. Actually, I learned so much about performance watching this film and rewatching this film and reading about this film, because the emotion, the desperation of the story creates exaggerated emotions that with any other actors, and in this case it's Philip Seymour Hoffman, Marissa Tomei, Albert Finney, Ethan Hawke, and other greats, in the hands of other actors it would be melodramatic in the worst possible way, just over the top, lose the audience, disconnect, and yet it still is melodramatic, exaggerated emotions, and yet is deeply rooted in the human desperation of this story. I don't want to say too much because you don't want to give away the plot for a film that a lot of people haven't seen, but it is a remarkable work. And the reason, so that's my number 7, and the reason I want to tie it to number 6 is because these two films came out the same year in 2007. In the same year, the Coen brothers released their masterpiece of No Country for Old Men, which I know will make an appearance in other lists. But these are both, I just think of them side by side. When I realized that they came out the same year, I hadn't realized before rewatching them, but No Country for Old Men, again, pure, perfect masterpiece in tone. These two films couldn't be more different, and yet, in my mind, No Country for Old Men, the perfection of it is a story about the embodiment of evil in its character, Sugar. But whereas Before the Devil Knows You're Dead is a story of just of everyday evil. You've got embodied evil, pure embodied evil in No Country for Old Men, and everyday on the streets desperate evil. They're not doing it necessarily all premeditated, certainly the crime, but their actions and what they're most guilty of and regret and filled with shame over are done out of desperation. Whereas in No Country for Old Men, the man, just the embodiment of evil, and as the police officers and the other characters, Brolin and Tommy Lee Jones, as they are being pursued by or pursuing the antagonist, played by Javier Bardem in No Country for Old Men. They're both they're trying to understand, how can this evil even exist? How can our world, a place of beauty and peace, and of course the cinematography tells that story, that beauty and peace and tranquility, how can a world like that include a personification of evil like this? Which it does, of course, sadly. But that's the position it puts the audience in, with the genius of not only the Coen brothers, but the work they're adapting by Cormac McCarthy.
Yeah.
And the book itself is still is worth a read as well.
Yes.
But so I'm lumping them together because they both are a very different perspective on evil, but done with incredible artistic genius, incredible storytelling and performances in both of these films. But I'll leave it at that unless you guys have feedback. But my number 7, Before the Devil Knows You're Dead, and my number 6, No Country for Old Men.
2007, what a year it was, huh?
Yeah.
Best movie year of the century, I'd say.
You didn't even mention the best movie of that year, man.
Yeah. Yeah, man.
All right, Furman, what do you got for us? Number 7.
Yeah, we'll come back. No Country's in my top 5, so that'll come back around. But
It's my number 6 as well, so we're coming back around to that
okay,
again.
Cool.
Great. Well, maybe I'll just have it out when you do your 6, and then we'll just, just synergy.
Have it out.
So my number 7 is Collateral, which Tripp mentioned earlier, and what you said is great, man. Like, I just want to point out a couple things about it quickly that I love. First of all, I don't love everything Michael Mann made, but he's perfect for this film. He's kind of obsessed with details and the way things are shot and these sorts of things. He creates in LA that you rarely see in this film. It's a film about a taxi driver Jamie Foxx, who ends up sort of getting shoehorned into driving around an assassin played by a gray-haired Tom Cruise. The thing that's fascinating about the film is it's basically a road movie. Like, they're just traveling around LA, but it's not a buddy comedy road movie. But there is those sorts of elements. Like, there's cat and mouse. They're sort of trying to one up each other. Jamie Foxx starts out as this really meek and pansy character, and it's like peak Cruise, like kook Scientology Cruise, like he's just killing it, man. And he's killing it as the villain in this film. And it's shot with these like the way they shot it digitally gives you it's just this crazy cityscaping visuals to it.
How long do you think this will take?
7 minutes.
7. Not 8, not 6.
2 minutes to get across the 110 to Normandy to Venice, 3 minutes. Over to Union is 1 plus 1 for shit happens.
Okay if I time you?
Knock yourself out.
What do I get if you're wrong? Free ride?
You get an apology. I already offered him my free ride today.
To who?
Some girl.
Did you get a date with her?
First time in LA?
No. Tell you the truth, whenever I'm here, I can't wait to leave. Sprawled out, disconnected. That's me. You like it?
It's my home.
17 million people. This is a country the 5th biggest economy in the world, and nobody knows each other. I read about this guy gets on the MTA here, dies. 6 hours he's riding the subway before anybody notices his corpse doing laps around LA, people on and off sitting next to him. Nobody notices.
Great.
Why don't you give us your 6? Can you give us your 6 as well? Because my 6 is No Country, so we'll come back to that.
Yeah. So my 6 is Hurt Locker.
Nice.
Yeah, dude. This is the most surprising film that on my like, in other words, I did not expect it to be on my list. I made myself rewatch it, and I just went, holy crap. Like, this is so good. Dude, they've been making movies about war for so long. I'm just kind of done with it. Like, I'm saturated. And like they've had anti-war films like Platoon and all the way back to like Paths of Glory with Kubrick, and they've had the valorous films like Saving Private Ryan and all that sort of stuff. And this one starts with the quote, which you said offline, Trip, war is a drug. And it's shot with these handheld cameras and the shake, like that stuff usually bothers me. But in this film, it's perfect. It's great, man. And Jeremy Renner is like dialing it up to 100 in this film. He's over the top. He's just phenomenal, man. The action's good. The dialogue is great with, man, see, I'm going to just blow my Marvel. He's Anthony Mackie. Like, what's he play? The dude that flies around? I don't know anything about him. Yeah. Anyway, I just
watched The Adjustment Bureau last night, so yeah.
He's killing it. And he plays the smart guy, and Renner is kind of like, if you're picturing sort of full mod, he's like just over the top, man. And this was directed by Catherine Bigelow, okay? So who kills it, right? And
best director.
She wins. And this was the year when she's battling her ex-husband, James Cameron, for Avatar, right? Remember all that? So that was fun. But the real reason I put this on my list, is the last thing I'll say, is the last 10 minutes of the film. So you're watching all this war sequences, and the thing about it is, like, you're trying to figure out where they are. Like, I looked it up to say for this video that the three of us are going to watch. I looked it up and I was like, are they in Afghanistan? Are they in Iraq? It doesn't matter, because that's what war is in this film. It's completely pointless. They're looking up. There's people watching him. He could be a goat farmer or a bomber. And they're disarming some bombs and doing, like, it's all so pointless and meaningless and sort of crazy and disorienting. And then in the end, and I won't spoil, Renner finally has to face what it's like to go home after this. Yeah. And it's not some grand statement on PTSD or whatever. It's only like 10 minutes, but it's so impactful. Like, you just leave, like, the credits roll and you're just like, oh my God, man. Like, what a depiction of war as a drug. So it just shocked me. And it shocked me that it climbed this high, but that's my number 6.
Awesome.
Nice. No, it's a great choice. So many to choose from. It's so hard. I know.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna talk about my 7 and 6, both of which have been mentioned. My turn to give QT some love. So Tarantino, I'm with you, Kleiner. I think both. I'll say it's my favorite for sure of his is Inglourious Bastards. Debatable about whether it's his best. Pulp Fiction's there, and in my mind, it's both his best and my favorite. And here's what I like it to. Let's say aliens invaded the planet Earth, and they're exploring the life of cinema. If I'm going to show them one movie from this character named Quentin Tarantino, I'm showing them Inglourious Bastards, because this is everything that I love about Tarantino packed into one film. You've got the homage to the Old West here. I mean, the opening scene in this movie is phenomenal. I mean, you've got Christoph Waltz here. The first 50, within a minute, I'm rewatching it. I'm like, you got the movie of Ennio Morricone. I mean, all over this, right? I'm going back to my spaghetti Western days, and I'm loving it. So you've got the score. You've got Tarantino gratuitous violence. You've got scalpings and permanent swastika tattoos in the forehead. I mean, you've got this witty dialogue. You've got the hilarious accents. You got Brad Pitt hamming it up. Did you know that Adam Sandler was originally supposed to be in this film?
Yes.
And it went to Eli Roth.
Wow.
Yes.
I mean, he's the only guy that was miscast, in my opinion. I mean, but this is Christoph Waltz's movie. This movie doesn't even get made without Christoph Waltz.
Yeah.
Ooh, that's a bingo.
Is that the way you say it? That's a bingo.
You just say bingo. Bingo! How fun!
I mean, for him to the French, the German, I mean, his Italian makes him seem like a native Italian more than my botched attempt at Spanish 2 hours ago, whatever it was I said my number 10. But for all the reasons people love Tarantino, this is the epitome of a good Tarantino movie, in my opinion. And it held its own on rewatch, and so it's solidly in my top 10. It's my number 7. My number 6, and we can hash it out a little more now, is No Country for Old Men as well, Kleiner. This is my third favorite. If you're gonna push me, Coen Brothers film.
Okay.
Stay tuned when we do our '90s one. But this is a masterpiece. And again, it is the epitome of evil. So if you look at the Joker in my number 8, you look at Hans Landa, played by Christoph Waltz, in my number 7. Then you got Anton Chigurh, played by Javier Bardem. These three individuals personify evil in various ways. But with Bardem's character, it's almost like there's a logic to it, right? He's flipping coins to see if people are going to live or die. It's not just like total anarchy like Heath Ledger as the Joker. He's got sort of a logic to it, which makes it even more creepy and scarier in a sense. So that character just drew me in. I mean, he's walking around there. I mean, with his weapon of
it's
choice.
evil. It's evil in control, right? That's what's so terrifying about the film.
Yeah,
it's evil. He controls the scene or whatever conversation or relationship he's in. In every scene, he's controlling it, which makes it all the more terrifying.
What's the most you ever lost on a coin toss?
Sir?
The most you ever lost on a coin toss?
I don't know. I couldn't say.
Call it.
Call it?
Yes.
For what?
Just call it.
Well, we need to know what we're calling it for here.
You need to call it. I can't call it for you. Well, it wouldn't be fair.
I didn't put nothing up.
Yes, you did. You've been putting it up your whole life. You just didn't know it. You know what date is on this coin?
No.
1958. It's been traveling 22 years to get here. And now it's here. And it's either heads or tails. And you have to say, call it.
Well, look, I need to know what I stand to win.
Everything.
How's that?
You stand to win everything, call it.
All right. Heads, then.
Well done. Don't put it in your pocket.
Sir?
Don't put it in your pocket. It's your lucky quarter.
Where do you want me to put it?
Anywhere not in your pocket. Or it'll get mixed in with the others and become just a coin. Which it is.
If you haven't seen No Country for Old Men, it is indeed a masterpiece, one of many by the Coen Brothers. My number 6.
Awesome. Okay, so now we're in the top 5, are we?
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, this is where we're getting into good movies now. These are the good ones.
Yeah, these are the ones we really recommend. Forget the previous 15 that we've mentioned. Okay, top 5 of that decade. Top 5. Number 5 is 2003's In America, which was my favorite film of that year from Irish storyteller Jim Sheridan, who worked with the great Daniel Day-Lewis many times. Not in this picture. I'm not sure if that's sadly, but In America is Jim Sheridan's sort of most biographical story of an immigrant family settling in America, in New York City, I believe it's set in the 80s. And I mean, it's just a true harrowing, painful, heartbreaking, heartwarming family story. A family that has suffered loss and is still walking through the process of grief, and yet, and for that reason, is choosing a new start, starting a new life. And literally, another child is in the womb over the course of the story. But again, not unlike our conversation with Pan's Labyrinth, this is a story told through the eyes of a child. And so there's 2 little daughters in this family, and it's the youngest who is our narrator, who we see the world around her, a world of chaos, again, a world of loss and struggle. As a father struggles to become an actor, and a mother struggles to keep the family together, and they're living in poverty, and they're surrounded by people in need. And but all of that chaos is seen through the innocence and the beauty of a child, as this family strives to stay together and grow in their love. And of course, now how do we say his name? I can't even think of.
The Amistad dude.
Yeah, the Amistad dude. I can't even think of how to pretend to pronounce his name
I'll
now.
look it up.
Juman?
Simon Hansu.
Simon Hansu. There we go. Let's go with Hansu.
Yeah.
And actually, I don't know if he was nominated for. I think he was nominated for an Oscar for this. I mean, he's been nominated a few times. He's an incredible actor, but he, of course, not surprisingly, has a powerhouse performance in this film as their neighbor. But I feel like powerhouse is almost disrespectful because this is a totally different kind of performance, where it is a performance of pain and trust, opening oneself up to another, to share and be reconciled in the midst of pain. I'm being very vague. I don't want to give much away because it's an emotional journey. And it's beautifully shot, incredibly written and performed. And in America, that's my number 5.
I'm looking at my list. I'm like, 2003 is the only year that's not represented here. I'm thinking, what was I doing in 2003? I was living in South Korea, and I was just watching Asian films. Apparently, I haven't even seen this, confession time. So I need to bump this up on my to-watch list. So it's one thing I enjoy about these is I get a couple movies that I haven't seen or slipped through the cracks that you guys bring to my attention. So
yeah,
I will put
that
on
was
my
probably
to-watch
the most obscure, I'd say. Well, and actually, never mind. If you go with the one you're probably going after this, probably even more obscure. But yeah, my number 5 was the Lord of the Rings Fellowship. So I'm going to kick it over to you, Jason.
Okay, yeah, we already discussed that one. All right, picking up the pace. Look at this.
Look at us
my
go.
Number 5. I have a good buddy who hates this movie. We disagree about it all the time. He picks these big plot holes out. I'm like, whatever. This is a great movie. It's one of my favorite sort of futuristic sci-fi movies all time. And we're coming back to Tom Cruise. He's not got gray hair in this one. He has no hair for a portion of this movie. This is Minority Report.
Nice.
And this one leapfrogged a few on rewatch. I thought it would be in my honorable mention, maybe the lower echelon, my top 10. Rewatched it with my family, and man, not only did it hold its own, but it actually jumped up on my list to number 5.
Oh,
this is probably my second favorite Spielberg movie. It's hard to pick favorite Spielberg movies. There's so many.
Wow.
But I just love the world that Spielberg has built here. I love the plot, the intricacy of this plot. It moves. I mean, if there's one critique I have about this film, it loses a bit of steam in the last sort of 10 to 15 minutes, I think. Spielberg, if there's one critique of Spielberg, sometimes he has trouble sort of landing the plane in some of his films. But that's a minor squabble. I mean, this is a phenomenal film. It's gripping from start to finish. You jump right into the film, the first 10, 15 minutes. I mean, and then it unrolls the whole plot. And I'm sure most people have seen this movie, but just this is an original screenplay, is it not, with Spielberg? Or is this based on a book, or is this?
It's Philip K.
What's that?
Yeah, it's Phil K. Dick.
Philip K. Dick.
Oh, right. Yeah. But just the intricacy, the unique plot. I mean, the whole addition, the idea of having these precogs that can predict future crimes and murders and stop them. It's just so unique. It's like nothing I've seen in a film like this. The action sequences are phenomenal. I mean, the scene where he gets sort of trapped inside this futuristic car and then drives out, gets away from people chasing him. I mean, there's so many scenes. My kids adore this movie. I watch it with them. And not only that, but we had like a half-hour conversation after watching this film about determinism and free will and the future, and it was beautiful. So for a lot of different reasons, this film, rightfully so, is in my top 10. It's my number 5, Minority Report.
Awesome. So my number 4 is my favorite film by the great Paul Thomas Anderson. And you mentioned this actor earlier before, and it just made me think, who knew that Adam Sandler would appear on the best of a decade list? I mean, back in the 90s, who knew?
Son of a bitch, Paul, why didn't you just go home? That's your home! Are you too good for your home? Answer me! Suck my white ass, Paul!
But that is the case for me with Paul Thomas Anderson's 2002 Punch Drunk Love. That's my number 4. I mean, lots of love for Paul Thomas Anderson, and I don't know if we've mentioned this, but I think we all did this with this list, where our favorite filmmakers made multiple incredible films in this decade, but we tried to use restraint and limit in most cases, maybe not all of our cases, try to limit, okay, I'm going to give one to Paul Thomas, one to Fincher, one to, this kind of thing. So, he made other great films in this decade, and I know you guys will probably talk about that, but for me, Punch Drunk Love is something almost otherworldly. I mean, the first time experiencing it, and every time I rewatch it, it's unlike anything else. And I was shocked upon rewatch. It's 90 minutes. It's a 90-minute film.
Yeah, it's so brisk.
And it doesn't feel like that, and I mean that positively. It sweeps you away with not just its musical score, but its soundscape, its sound design. It's an anxiety-ridden soundscape,
right, with
a hopeful romantic score. Like that, if you can think about that, like the relationship of that's the story in a nutshell. An anxiety-ridden soundscape with a hopeful romantic score, as we follow Adam Sandler's character on a journey of a man who's been pushed out, bullied, abused emotionally and mentally his whole life. By all accords on paper, is living a perfectly fine, stable, successful life in terms of a career and all that stuff, but is deeply hurt and wounded, and imploding emotionally to the point that he explodes emotionally at certain times. And it is maybe it's a little entertaining, his extroverted explosions, but the genius of Paul Thomas Anderson here with Punch Drunk Love is that in every other Adam Sandler movie, the external emotional explosion is done for laughs.
Right.
Here, you feel his pain. He's doing the same thing. He's doing the same shtick effectively, but in the hands of a careful craft and storyteller. And the effect here is that your heart breaks for him, to the point that I just love the emotional climactic moment to me at the end as he confronts, one of many antagonists, but the most theatrical, played by Philip Seymour Hoffman, as he confronts him, the emotional, just the confrontation that he finally stands up for himself. And he declares to the world, but to a single human being actually, that he has found a love, someone who loves him for who he is. And it's just so beautiful. It's just so emotional and wonderful and unexpected. I guess that's the power of this film, is just in so many ways it's unexpected. And I adore Punch Drunk Love. So that's my number 4.
That's great.
Nice. Well said.
Yeah. My number 4 kind of segues nice in 2 ways. One, it's another kind of left field romantic comedy, I would say. And also, like, the same thing you had said about Adam Sandler would be true about Jim Carrey, probably. Not like shocking that he would show up in a top 10 list, but my number 4 is Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. Man, I freaking love this movie. Like, I love it. And I love what it says about real love. And after September will be 15 years I've been married, it makes even more sense to me now than it did when I first saw it. It's a movie about, well, first of all, Charlie Kaufman didn't direct it, but he's behind the writing of this. And I would encourage people to watch everything he did, maybe take some headache medicine first, because he writes a film adaptation where he basically is a character writing himself into the film. Like, there's all these layers going on. And that's happening here too. It's a sort of futuristic world where you can go to this place and they'll erase, you'll go into your brain and literally erase the memories of a love. So Kate Winslet, who is just so dynamic in this role, does that to him. He realizes it and decides he wants to do it himself. And then we get to travel through his own mind backwards with him as all these things are being erased. And he realizes in the middle that he's not quite sure that he wants them gone. Mm. So there's like scenes changing. Like, you get this in media res things, you get things like scenes and props changing in time, you get all this sort of stuff. And I don't want to spoil the ending of the film, but I think it says some really powerful things about love being a commitment above all things, and understanding that sometimes it's you at your worst and me at our worst, and we choose each other anyway. And knowing what could come, will you make that choice anyway? So that's kind of being obtuse, but I just think it's absolutely fantastic.
Absolutely.
Nice.
Incredible film.
Nice. This is the one film that I didn't get to rewatch that I wish I would have, because I enjoyed it and I need to, and it may have been on my list as well. But
it was one of my early rewatches, and it was in my top 5, honestly, for a long time.
Yeah.
And it was just, it's an impossible task, but I adore that film too. And ultimately it's what you just said, the finale of a true portrayal of love as a commitment, love as a choice.
Right. Choice.
Right?
Yeah.
And just incredible film.
Hi. I figured you'd show your face around me again. Because I thought you were humiliated. You did run away, after all.
I just needed to see you.
Yeah?
I'd like to, take you out or something.
You're married.
Not yet. Not married. No, I'm not married. No.
Look, man, I'm telling you right off the bat, I'm high maintenance, so I'm not gonna tiptoe around your marriage or whatever it is you got going there. If you want to be with me, you're with me.
Okay.
Too many guys think I'm a concept, or I complete them, or I'm gonna make them alive. But I'm just a fucked up girl who's looking for my own peace of mind. Don't assign me yours.
I remember that speech really well.
I had you pegged, didn't I?
Yeah, the whole human race pegged.
Probably.
I still thought you were going to save my life, even after that.
I know.
It would be different if we could just give it another go-round.
Remember me. Try your best. Maybe we can.
Okay, my number 4 is a light rom-com as well. No, it's not. No. My number 4 is The Wrestler. So you guys have been beating the drum of Aronofsky, and rightfully so. This is unique for Aronofsky. I mean, if you showed someone, Mother and Swan Lake or Black Swan. I mean, Swan Lake.
Well, that's what they're putting on. So
yeah. And then you show them this, you would not assume it's the same director, because it's something very unique. Right. But it's for a while, and I will say these top 4 of mine, at one point or another, they were all number 1, and they were all jockeying for number 1. So unlike the last video we did, where I had a clear-cut number 1 with Malik, these were literally wrestling and jockeying for number 1. But The Wrestler, this is my favorite Aronofsky film. Most people don't think it's his best, but again, this is our favorite list. And for me, on rewatch too, this shot back up. I mean, how this doesn't win Best Actor, this just still makes my blood boil. I think we talked about this online a little bit, Furman?
Oh yeah.
Milk wins over this, but I digress. But Mickey Rourke, this is his comeback film. He was boxing for a season, and when Aronofsky cast him, probably taking a risk, but it paid off in spades, I think. And again, much like you were saying with The Hurt Locker, Furman, normally I don't like films that are just single camera, a bit shaky, but this works for this film. It's very minimalistic. Aronofsky strips everything away, and it's just basically a single camera shot of this man who cannot let go of something his identity is so wrapped up in, his career as a wrestler. He's a has-been, he's washed up, his body's literally breaking down, just as all of the relationships around him are breaking down. He's trying to have this relationship with a stripper, and that's going nowhere, and that's complicated. His daughter hates him because he left her earlier in his life. He's trying to pick up the pieces of his life, because he's feeling the void. He's feeling the void. Wrestling had filled this void in him for so long, and now he's struggling to fill that void with his wrestling. And so he's looking to restore all these broken relationships, and it's painful in a sense because his life is unraveling. But it is a deep and important meditation. And I take this very seriously in the world I live in as a pastor. I've seen so many ministers that just can't let go. Their whole identity gets wrapped up in what they do, and they harm themselves, and they sacrifice all of the relationships around them. And so it's something that I take very personally as I'm watching this. It's a meditation on identity. And it's painful at times, but it's beautifully portrayed. Mickey Rourke, this performance is lights out. And, in my mind, he won Best Actor this year. And so The Wrestler is my number 4. Furman, you want to weigh in on this? I think this was in your top couple as well.
Yeah, it's my number 3 actually. So I
take it away.
What's that?
Take it away. Number 3.
Yeah.
That's your number 3?
Yeah, man. So this is me breaking the rules that Kleiner said one film per director, because I have Requiem in my honorable mentions. But yeah, man, this is I think his best work and his most mature kind of meditation. And I agree with what you said, everything you said, man. The camera kind of the camera literally kind of follows him around in the film. And this isn't like the WWE. This isn't glamour wrestling. This is what happens when you're washed up and you're a has-been. And I think it's meta, crazy meta, because remember Mickey Rourke in the 80s and who he was, and then who this sort of broken shell of an man is into. I think all of us can remember our first Oscar rage moment where we're just like, you are morons, and this was mine. Sean Penn for Milk is fine, but this is a physical performance, an emotional performance, every layer of acting he's doing in this film. And he's nailing it. It's completely believable. Aronofsky casts real actors as wrestlers in the film. Everything in it is very realistic. Marissa Tomei is how do I say this delicately? In this movie, so her acting is phenomenal. She's so hot. You will forget about My Cousin Vinny after you watch this, which is itself a tremendous performance. But she's great, and she's the perfect foil for his character. And Evan Rachel Wood is his daughter, and it just all really works. And I think the last, again, the final image of the film is, man, it's one of those the credit rolls, and I'm sitting there, I'm just dang. Because like you said, man, everything outside of the ring, he gets wrong. And so he just can't let it go. Yeah, that's my number 3, The Wrestler. People should watch that movie, man. If you haven't seen
final shot. It's a movie there. Sometimes the litmus test for a good movie for me is how long I let the credits roll. And I always let the credits roll right to the end. And you got the boss bringing it home, Bruce Springsteen, during the credits. As you're just meditating on everything you just saw. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. That comment, Trip, will be very important for my number 1. So we'll come back to. I like that a lot. I appreciate you saying that. So let me share my number 3 then. My number 3, actually, I think this happened with the last decade we filmed, where the top 3 of that decade were already in my personal top films of all time. So it was kind of an easy scratch off the list kind of thing. In this case for this decade, it was the same thing where the top 3 are part of my favorite films of all time. And so my number 3 is by a personal favorite filmmaker, and it is his best film of all time, though he has made many in my opinion. But it's 2002 M. Night Shyamalan's Signs.
Nice.
And I adore Signs. You could almost say that film is a religion for me. I just in the weeks leading up to its release in 2002, which was a big year in my young life at that time, going off to college, I sort of had defined in my mind in the weeks leading up to, and with his previous pieces at that point, I was a huge fan of Shyamalan. But for whatever reason, I had defined in my mind certain story structures or elements that would be essential in my perfect movie or the perfect story if I was to ever write one. And then I saw Signs. And then I saw it again and again. And then 4 times opening weekend, because it's just perfection to me in terms of bringing an audience in, giving them the last thing they expected, and executed with such thoughtfulness but flair. And of course, we've talked about this personally, but we mentioned Guillermo del Toro being an expert of Hitchcock, but Shyamalan, admittedly, his entire career has said how much he's been influenced by Hitchcock. And in some ways, you could even argue that this was his adaptation of Hitchcock's The Birds. Signs shares a lot of themes and even shots with that film, deeply inspired by Hitchcock's craft for suspense. And the suspense and the terror and all that stuff of that film is wonderful. It's exciting, but really the heart of it is a story of faith and a story of family. A man who has lost his faith, a man who's experiencing what theologians call the dark night of the soul. Right. And to me, that's the real heartbeat of this incredible story, this fun, incredible story, Signs. Mel Gibson's arguably his best performance, maybe his last great performance, I don't know, but it's an incredible, thoughtful performance. I always hung to the little trivia fact that it was their first, it was either during their first week of filming, or it may have been their actual first day of filming was 9/11. And that the emotions of that played directly into what you find on screen. And a man who's lost his faith and lost his wife and is in a world falling apart. And and Joaquin Phoenix is in this in one of his many, many incredible performances. But this was sort of before he was what he is now, and he had a lot of great young performances, and this was one of them. And I just adore Signs for so many reasons, and so it's my number 3.
Nice. I just watched this with my kids recently, and again, watching, this, Kleiner, like watching movies with our family, that kind of elevates it. So my daughter goes to the bathroom halfway through. She comes back with tinfoil hats for us all. So we watched the second half with tinfoil. That was awesome. They were right into it. So yeah,
that's awesome.
It's great. Cool. Now you've already done your 3, Furman, right? That was Wrestler.
I think the comp you made about the Signs and the Birds is because like so much of the actual fear in Signs is not seen, right? It's ratcheted up. And the first time I saw it, I didn't get that because I thought it was boring. I was like, there's nothing going on here. All right. But, like you learn over time what's actually happening.
It's real education. Really are. It's awesome.
Yeah.
Cool.
Sorry, man. Yeah, my 3 we did. So
Trip, number 3.
Okay. Now my 3 and my 2 definitely deserve mention, and I'm pretty sure they're not going to be mentioned by you guys. But I absolutely adore both of these films. I'm going to give a little tribute to this guy right over my shoulder, right there. As good as an actor as he is, I think he's probably even better as a director. And $1 Million Baby is my number 3. This is my favorite movie directed by Clint Eastwood. It did win Best Picture in 2004. I watch this movie every couple of years, and man, it rocks me every time I view this movie. So for those who haven't seen this movie, I'm sure most have, Clint Eastwood plays a long time, kind of old, broken down guy, much like Mickey Rourke, boxing coach. So we're staying in the ring. We're in the ring theme here, going from wrestling to boxing. And he's been a successful coach, but he's kind of over the hill. Morgan Freeman plays his sidekick, and who better to narrate than Morgan Freeman? And then in walks a character played by Hilary Swank one day. She's just she's got some drive and some ambition, but she's living on the margin. She's a part-time waitress. There's one scene, someone leaves some steak on the plate and she wraps it up and brings it home for her and her dog. She's having trouble putting food on the table, but she wants to, she wants to become a boxer. So she walks in and she wants Clint Eastwood to train her. And Clint Eastwood in his gruff voice says, "Oh, I don't train girls around here." And he just writes her off. But all of a sudden, it goes from there, and their relationship through, hours on screen, it just blossoms. And it's this unlikely odd couple. I love movies that take people that are just polar opposite. They're such an unlikely couple, and through a series of events, and they're both broken in many ways. She's broken as an individual. He's broken. He's estranged from his daughter, we find out throughout the film, and she sort of helps him find some healing, and he helps her find some healing. But you think it's going to be this rocky story, this rags to riches story. Then halfway through the film, boom, there's just an excruciating event, and it takes the movie in a total different direction. And it rocks you, it wrecks you, but there's some beauty in it as well. And every time I watch it, it says something deep to me. It affects me deeply, and I couldn't keep it off my list. For a while, it was flirting with number one, but settled in at number 3, $1 Million Baby, and rightfully so. You know, if Mickey Rourke not winning Best Actor is a rage moment, this was a glory moment for me. This winning Best Actor, I think it deserved it.
Nice. Okay, my number two. It's disputable what year you could say this film was released. In North America, it came out in 2005, and it is an Australian masterpiece called The Proposition.
Oh, nice.
And again, this is a film that shares themes with things we've already discussed in earlier films, but it is a film that I don't think a lot of people have seen and people should see. But because it's an incredible work, it put director John Hillcoat on the scene, on the map, and he's done several good and great films since this. But this was an incredible achievement with a remarkable cast, including John Hurt and Guy Pearce and Emma Watson or Emily Watson. What are we saying? Which one is it? And the older one, right. And Ray Winstone. I mean, and others. I mean, it's the performances are incredible. It's a film of the historic outback that I think starts and throughout is repeated. I will civilize this land. It is the story of colonization in Australia by the British Empire, and it is a film of first of all, it's a film of beauty, incredible cinematography. But that beauty has a real purpose because it's a film of juxtaposition. It's a film that constantly is putting us at dis-ease between the civility of British life and the brutality of criminal life, if you can call it that. That seems too plain and simple for it. It juxtaposed a family in the Australian outback, a couple trying to celebrate Christmas while their home is robbed and they're held at gunpoint, and their lives are threatened and their lives are destroyed. A film of juxtaposition where you have incredible eloquence and John Hurt as a drunk bounty hunter, spewing Ulysses, are incredible works of ancient poetry, and yet willing to stab you in the back and surrounded by just cutthroat, evil men. It's just a film that really puts it in our face of who we are by nature, and the direction, the writing, the performances, the cinematography. But I have to also say the writing and the music were both done by musician Nick Cave, which for some people that means a lot. He's not necessarily a mainstream name, but his work here between writing and the soundscape that he creates for this film, this you could call it a Western, but of course an Australian Western is a completely other animal. Yeah. And the respect that is paid to Australians Aboriginals in this film, the historical accuracy and honesty, but also the little moments of reconciliation in terms of paying tribute and respect at the start of the film, at the end of the film, is quite poignant and remarkable. But The Proposition is a masterpiece. I adore this film. It's a hard one to watch. It's dark, it's violent, but it's powerful, and it's my number 2.
Nice.
Yeah, right on. That's man, that took me back. I've seen it, but it's been a minute.
Yeah, I didn't rewatch that one.
Yeah, sticking with Westerns, although this is definitely American, but I just want to add a couple things. My number 2 is No Country for Old Men. I think, I think my top 2 films are pretty perfect films. We talked to you guys nailed the Chigurh stuff, the stuff that Javier Bardem brings to the table, but it's the crazy precision of his moral ethic, which is a sort of ethic, but it's a pretty demented one. And you see it. It's the coin flip. It's the chance, but it's this rigorous thing that he sticks to. So versus Brolin's Llewellyn, who's really kind of an opportunist. You know, he's trying to looking for the money and where he can hide it. And the final sequence, one of the final sequences with Kelly MacDonald's character and Bardem really kind of, that's where you most see this come out. Like, this guy's a monster, but there's a certain logic to his dementia. The only other things I'd point out is, like, Roger Deakins shot this film, and he's the like, oh my God, it looks like one take in 1917 from last year. So, and they shot several films with Deakins. The other thing I wanted to mention is there's a ton of silence in this film. So everything that is said becomes weighted. Like almost if you're writing a quotables from this movie, there's so many. And almost everything Tommy Lee Jones says is like the heart of the film. And beyond that, the action is so good. Like, it's so good. Like, it's an anti-Western Western because there's all these quiet moments. There's a 10-minute scene in the middle of the movie where he's moving, Brolin's moving from one hotel to the other while Chigurh's giving chase.
Yeah.
There's no dialogue in it. And it's like the whole time you're on pins and needles because of the suspense of it. It's just unbelievable. Yeah. And so I just think when I rewatched it, some people get hung up on the ending, but the Coen brothers films all sort of say the same thing, which is like, the world's getting worse, period. Like, you know, it's really nihilistic. And, but this one, man, it's extremely well done. So that's my number 2, No Country for Old Men.
Solid. Well, my number 2 made a huge leap to get to this spot. When I rewatched this film, and I just recently rewatched it. Before rewatching it, I thought it was in honorable mention territory, maybe lower echelon top 10. I rewatched it with a notepad. I knew there was a lot of deep symbology in this movie, so I'm taking notes, I'm researching, I'm enjoying it immensely. We've mentioned Del Toro, we've mentioned Inarritu. We need to make mention and give kudos to the third member of the Three Amigos. So.
I'm Lucky Day. I'm Ned Niederlander. I'm Dusty Bottoms. So together we're the Three Amigos.
Alfonso Cuarón's masterpiece, Children of Men, rockets up my list all the way to number 2.
Number 2.
Number
wow.
2. Yeah.
Rise.
Yeah. Yeah. Yesterday it was 4, and I can't stop thinking about it each day I'm thinking about it, and sometimes the longer a movie just lingers between my ears, that says something to me, right? And again, this is very subjective. So the amount of symbology in this movie, and time doesn't permit, but if you Google this movie and all the symbols, the religious symbols, the spiritual symbols, the art on everything is carefully chosen by Cuarón in this movie. Not only the dialogue, but the backdrop and the world that's created. And the fact that I'm watching this movie in 2020, this dystopian future,
yes,
in the midst of the times that we're going through, I think contributes to it where it lands on my list. I mean, it's a good movie to watch at any time, but especially, I'm meditating not only on what I'm seeing, but how it relates to what we're living in our world today. And I'm like, wow. Now, Clive Owen, he's no Daniel Day-Lewis, we'll admit that. But he holds his own in this film. I mean, it's the nonverbal, some of his body language and the eyes. You see how much despair he's in early in the film, and then signs of hope, and you see the signs of hope in his eyes at the end of this film when he actually has a purpose to his life, because he's walking around this dystopian world where women are all infertile, they can't have children, and so he's lost a child and he's grieving that. He reconnects with his estranged wife played by Julianne Moore. I mean, her death scene, spoiler alert, that's just, man, heart-wrenching. That 3 minutes in that vehicle when she gets shot is heart-wrenching. But I mean, we were talking off camera earlier about maybe our favorite scenes of all these movies. This isn't my number 1, but I think this might be my favorite scene of all these movies, is when they're hiding out, Clive Owen's character, and spoiler alert, plug your ears if you haven't seen this movie, but they discover a young woman who is pregnant and who is able to have a child, and she delivers this child. And it gives him not only him, but the whole world, a renewed sense of hope and purpose. I mean, very much paralleling the nativity scene. I mean, no room in the inn. They're in a war-torn sort of Russian area, almost, it looks like. And no, it's in Britain, sorry. And they're hiding out in this building. It's just getting barraged, it's getting shelled and shell shocked. And all of a sudden, he's able to get to this young girl and rescue her from the other captors who want to take her away, and they have their own reasons for doing that. And then all of a sudden, this baby lets out this cry, and everything else just goes silent. And it's almost like all the war, all the violence, all the bloodshed just calms down with this crying of a baby. And like, that's not a parallel to the gospel story. What is, right? And they're making their way out of this building, carrying this baby, and all the, the soldiers who were trying to kill each other, now they're crossing themselves, and they're in awe of this. And it's just such a gripping, it's one of probably my favorite scenes in all of cinema, to be honest.
You okay? How is she?
Annoyed.
Move back! Fucking move back! Stop! Cease fire! Cease firing!
Of Men, I will rewatch it time and time again. It just seems like it's a movie. There's layers and layers of more symbols and things to learn and discover. It's a masterpiece by Alfonso Cuarón, Del Toro, and Inarritu. 5 of the last 10 best pictures have gone to them collectively. So kudos to the three amigos.
Yeah.
I wanted to give all three of them a shout out in my list, and Cuarón's at the top, number 2. Children of Men.
Okay. Wow. Well, here we are, number 1.
Woo, we made it to the top of the mountain. Nick Cage, here we go. Nick Cage, all right.
Let's get it.
Which Nick Cage movie is it? Is the only big reveal here.
Well, I told you there'd be a Nick Cage twist, and of course, people watching would know it from reference that I love Nick Cage and have been rewatching all his films from this decade, and you guys were giving me a hard time for it. But the big twist is that he's not in this list.
What?
Oh, so disappointed.
Not in this list.
Come on.
Twist ending, guys. Twist ending. No, but I just pulled it off the shelf, actually. It's sitting here in front of me. My number 1 film of this decade, and it was immediately when I saw it in 2007, immediately thrust upon my favorite films of all time. And it is
Oh,
Clayton.
okay. Great
I
flick.
thought we had a three-way
I
crossover
thought
for
we
a
were getting
second.
a three-way on that. Yeah.
Mr. Michael Clayton.
Great flick. Great flick.
Tony Gilroy wrote, directed. He has written many great screenplays. He's directed a few films, all good, but this was something else.
Yeah.
And Tripp, when you talked about you gauge or you rate films based on how long you have to sit through the credits, first time seeing Michael Clayton in the theater will forever be etched in my memory, because the credits begin on George Clooney's face, and it follows him, or it just sits on him for a few minutes before it actually fades to black and we see the rest. And the catharsis, the emotional catharsis and emotional experience I had in that moment, the weight of the entire story and narrative coming to that moment where we watch his face as a close-up of him in the back of a taxi driving away, and the burden being lifted off of him of the story of what he just went through. And it's such, I would love to read some study on that shot, on that scene.
Yeah.
Because I've watched it time and time again, and he does nothing, but he does everything. His face tells it all. And I just wept, and I still cry every time I watch Michael Clayton. And the elevator pitch is something like, it's the story of a law firm, a high-end law firm's cleanup guy, legal counsel cleanup guy, a law firm story and thriller that never sets foot in a courtroom. And that was, I think Gilroy talks about that in the commentary, never sets foot in a courtroom, and yet it's all about lawyers, legality, loopholes, and and a crisis of ethics and conscience. And it's an incredible film, and Clooney's best. It's beautifully shot, but I guess for me, it's a film that's about an existential and vocational crisis, and it's just continues to speak to me through the years as I get older and I rewatch it, because you have this juxtaposition: a man, George Clooney, Michael Clayton. You have Michael Clayton in the midst of this story, in the thick of the conflict and the friction, the heat of a crisis. And then you have all the pressures of the antagonists forcing him into it, or forcing him to continue to run from it, or be confronted by it. And then you have Tom Wilkinson's character, and arguably his best performance. And he's on the other end of it. He's broken free by having a mental breakdown. This character's had a mental breakdown and has rediscovered his subconscious, or rediscovered his innocence. And so he, again, we've mentioned multiple times, seeing a story through the eyes of a child. Tom Wilkinson in his 50s or 60s is doing that exact same thing in Michael Clayton. He's rediscovering the beauty of the world. And of course, as a man his age, speaking and pontificating and reflecting on the world in this way, he's a crazy person to everyone around him. He has lost it, no grip on reality. And yet he's the heart and soul of this film, because Tom Wilkinson's character is in conversation with George Clooney's son, and reflecting on a myth and a conquest narrative, and rediscovering the meaning of life and calling and vocation. And all along the way, they're talking about it on the phone, and Michael Clayton, George Clooney's character, is going through it the whole time, running for his life, trying to control the outcome of his consequences. Tilda Swinton, I didn't even mention her. Tilda Swinton in her best performance ever. This was a film that showed me characters like I'd never seen them before, because it captures vulnerable, private moments. That was one of the first things that really hit me about the film, and has always stuck with me, because it's not just about the performances, that the fact that these incredible actors would have these subtle little private nuanced moments, getting dressed in the morning, or getting something from the bakery on the way to work. It's that Tony Gilroy had the foresight to include those shots, or intentionally film those shots, and make that part of the narrative and the experience, that we're seeing these characters that in a legal thriller by John Grisham would be a caricature, would be an archetype, and would have no depth. Every antagonist, every person struggling or going through a crisis in the film is full rounded 360. We see them at their worst, we see them at their best, we see them at their greatest falsehood and their front and their mask, and we see the fact that they just the fragility, the frailty that we all have in terms of knowing who we are and what we're pursuing in life. And anyways, I just love Michael Clayton so much. It wasn't even a contest. As soon as we decided to do this video, I knew Michael Clayton was my number one.
Oh wow!
And so there you go.
Is he crying?
I don't know.
Because of drugs, right?
That and everything else.
What?
Your Uncle Timmy, and I mean this, on his best day, where he's never as tough as you. I'm not talking about crying or the drugs or anything. I'm talking about in his heart, You understand me? And all this charming bullshit, this Big Tim, Uncle Boss bullshit, and I know you love him, and I know why. But when you see him like that, you don't have to worry, because that's not how it's going to be for you. You're not going to be one of these people that goes through life wondering why shit keeps falling out of the sky around them. I know that. I know it. Okay? I see it every time I look at you. I see it right now. I don't know where you got it from, but you got it. Okay?
Well, now you can empathize with me and my Malik pick on our last video. So that's how I felt last decade. But this decade was a slugfest in my top few. Furman?
Yeah.
I'm fairly confident we have the same number one. But why don't you do the big reveal here?
Yeah, I have to say, totally with Kleiner on Clayton. Like, that was a great pitch. It's just, it was 2000. This is the greatest year maybe in history, 2007.
No.
Because I already had, like, Zodiac isn't even in the conversation. You got New Country for Old Men, the film we're about to name, and Michael Clayton once. And if you go through, I mean, it's
and Sidney Lumet film, wasn't that 07 as well?
So my number one and Jason's number one is Paul Thomas Anderson's There Will Be Blood.
Yeah.
Right?
Nice.
Well, let's just slow clap it out, man. Just
stop.
Yes. Look at that, man.
When I rewatched No Country for Old Men, I was like, oh my gosh, this is number one. Like, it might actually beat There Will Be Blood. And my initial, what I remembered about There Will Be Blood. And then I watched There Will Be Blood again, and I just went, this is just a perfect, like, this is a transcendent film. It's one of the best films of our lifetime, I'd say. It starts with a 16-minute, no dialogue score by Johnny Greenwood from Radiohead, one of my favorite bands, and his score is like a living, breathing character. It's like, it's unbelievable. And then the different, like the battles and the one-upsmanship between Paul Dano's Eli the Preacher and DDL's Daniel Plainview, who I'm with Kleiner about Bill the Butcher's. He's everything that he has going on outward, Plainview has going inward.
Good point. Yeah.
And until it does come outward, and there's a violence in him and a distance in him, and an expression of the kind of soul rotting that happens when you distance yourself from everyone, and I do mean everyone. As the son, the HW character in this rewatch, what really impacted me a lot. And it's also about selling stuff and how religion can be sold, just like oil. And it's about a ton of stuff, man. But I'll pass it over to you, Trip. I just think I wanted to be like, no, Paul Thomas Anderson, Daniel Day-Lewis, the score, Johnny Greenwood, the shots, the production design, the derricks, the cinematography, but it's all there, man. It's just that good. So,
yeah.
Is there a sinner here looking for salvation? A new member? I'll ask it again. Is there a sinner here looking for God?
Yes.
Thank you for coming, Brother Daniel.
Thank you, Eli.
We have a sinner with us here who wishes for salvation. Daniel, are you a sinner?
Yes.
Oh, the Lord can hear you, Daniel. Say it to him. Go ahead and speak to him. It's all right.
Yes.
Down on your knees and to him. Look up to the sky and say it.
What do you want me to say?
Daniel, you've come here and you've brought good and wealth, but you have also brought your bad habits as a backslider. You've lusted after women and you have abandoned your child. Your child that you raised, you have abandoned all because he was sick and you have sinned. So say it now. I am a sinner.
I am a sinner.
Say it louder. I am a sinner.
I am a sinner.
Louder, Daniel. I am a sinner.
I am a sinner.
I am sorry, Lord.
I am sorry, Lord.
I want the blood.
I want the blood.
You have abandoned your child.
I've abandoned my child.
I will never backslide.
I will never backslide.
I was lost, but now I am found.
I was lost, but now I'm found.
I have abandoned my child. Say it.
I abandoned my child.
Say it louder. Say it louder.
I've abandoned my child. I've abandoned my child. I've abandoned my boy.
Beg for the blood.
Give me the blood, Eli. Let me get out of here. Give me the blood, Lord, and let me get away.
Do you accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior?
Yes, I do.
Get out of here, devil! Out, devil! Out, sin! Do you accept the Church of the Third Revelation as your spiritual guide? Get out of here! Get out of here! Get out of here! Do you accept Jesus Christ as your Savior?
Yes, I do.
Would you be free from the burden of sin? There's power in the blood. Power in the blood. Would you reveal the victory win? There's wonderful power in the blood.
Yeah.
I agree with everything you said, and then some. This is one of the best movies of our generation, and it's telling. Like, I told myself, okay, I'm going to go back, I'm going to rewatch from 2000 and work my way through. What am I putting in my Blu-ray first? This one. It's almost like subconsciously I knew I wanted to rewatch this one first because I knew how much I loved it. And yet, you know, it wasn't a lock for number one, but after rewatching it and some others flirting with the spot, I said, no, this deserves number one. For many reasons, everything you've listed. I think this is one of the most iconic performances I've ever seen, and I think you nailed it. Bill the Butcher is very much outward his emotion. You just sort of see almost a slow boil in Daniel Plainview's character here until he unleashes hell upon Paul Dano in the final shots of this film. But I think I understood better the ending of this film upon rewatching it this time. It's almost like the ending scene in the bowling alley almost parallels the baptism scene early on. Whereas, you know, Daniel Plainview is getting baptized early on, and then in the end, he's turning the tables and you have baptism with blood, literally, by getting bludgeoned by a bowling pin. But it seems like Paul Thomas Anderson is a genius, and he's writing this clearly. He's got the end in mind, and he's working his way back, and everything connects together and leads, and it's almost paralleling how both in the world of oil and big business, the turn of the century, and in religion, both of those can be sort of tarnished. Both of those can be a means to the inevitable implosion, and both those characters implode as they're in different worlds. One is in the world of religion, one is in the world of big business and oil, but they both got personal motives that seep into their lives, just as oil seeping out of the earth, right? Things are seeping out of their hearts, things are seeping out of their lives. But something we didn't mention is that the character of Daniel Plainview and his son's relationship in the film is fascinating. Seeing some of the times when they're on screen together, those are some of my favorite moments in this film, when they're talking, and you almost see a glimmer of affection, of real affection toward his son, but they're very fleeting and they're few and far between. And you wanna hope that he's got some redeeming qualities, and then it just evaporates as he just becomes more and more consumed with distancing himself from everyone else, and where he literally says, "I hate everyone else." It's a classic. It's a masterpiece in the truest sense of the words. And with that,
I'm finished.